Imagine that there is an easy way to cure all of your issues, your problems, your blocks, your hurt, your pain, your trauma, to bring in your gifts, your talents. It's easy. Have a chart reading about your parents. And if you can, even their parents. It's science, not woo-woo. Let me explain. One particular enlightening application of astrology is using it to better understand the roles of your parents. You chose your parents, whether you did this karmically, and karmic is not a path of redemption or where you are been given a lifetime where you'll be punished because of karmic dues or debts, etc. Karma is nothing to do with that. Karma is simply action. Karma and action, same word, it's a Sanskrit word for karma, means that the action that you take will create a reaction. And it's the acceptance and the understanding of that. If you react to the reaction, then you become engaged in a cyclical motion of karma. And it can be good, it can be bad, it can be uncomfortable, it can be easy. However, if you understand where your parents come from, and you can pinpoint that you have similar traits that you would like to work on, and many of that, parents will say, I do not want to be like my mom. Oh my gosh, I'm acting like my father. I have anger issues, as my mother did. I just ended up yelling at my kids because they didn't listen to my rules, just like my mother was a rule maker and I was a rule breaker. These are extremely important traits to understand. Why is there science that backs it up? It's called epigenetics. So just bear with me for a bit. Epigenetics is the science of how behavior and environment can affect gene expression without altering the underlying DNA and sequences. Essentially, a gene carries the imprint of past experiences, trauma, and even patterns of emotional responses passed down to generations. They have done tests with mice and with dogs. Not so happy with the mice test, but this was years ago, decades ago, when it was quite popular, is they would zap mice to stop them from leaving an opened cage. So every time they got zapped, eventually they would just stop trying to even attempt to go out of the opened cage in which they could escape. Later on, when they had babies, the babies did the same thing. The babies would never even attempt to leave the cage. Epigenetics. With the dogs, they took female dogs. There's not a lot of studies done with the males, but female dogs, and they exposed them to a certain scent. That was not an uncomfortable scent, but it was a consistent scent that they would get a little bit stronger, a little bit stronger, a little bit stronger. It's almost like the overwhelming scent of, let's say, a rose, but it was more of a chemical smell. And eventually they did not like the scent. They would do whatever they could to get away from it, walk around it, walk away from it. And there, what happened, and they did this with mice too, when they had offspring, when they had babies, the babies were instantly reacting to the scent, even if it was mild and not as evasive. So what epigenetics tells us, and there's even studies done where they have said that children that were born, conceived during World War I or II, or during the Civil Wars, were somehow born with dispositions to have diabetes and a few other few other illnesses. When they had offspring, the offsprings also had the same illnesses. So the idea is, and these are extreme cases, but if you understand the makeup of your mother's human self, some of these experiences that she had as a child may have nothing to do with how she reacted to it. She may have been severely abused. Anyone would have a negative imprint within their DNA by being severely abused. May have been in a serious car accident or ran away from a war-torn situation. And that's my story, which I'm going to tell soon, because I can tell you how you can turn this around. The neat thing about epigenetics and DNA is just as easily as you can have sensitized mice in an open cage with a zap, or sensitize them with a smell, or dogs with a smell, you can desensitize them as well, so that you can turn it around so that they're not affected in the next generation. But you can do it with yourself by simply understanding your parents' life, your parents as a person. Just like when I first do a reading, the first 10 minutes as I talk about you and who you are on a deep level, I do this with your parents as well. Now, I have had clients who've had past life regression hypnosis therapy with me. They've experienced their father or their mother or their brother in a past life with a completely different story, and understanding them on a more human level. They're basically just girls trying to live their life, boys trying to live their life, just like you are. But it's hard to understand that when trapped within our DNA is a sequence that is imprinted in us. The other biological portion of it is that, and you can look this up, your mother, when she was born with the eggs, was born with eggs in her already to be developed eventually, like seeds, to be developed into eggs that can be fertilized at the, between the age of 11 and 14, and then eventually may be fertilized one day. Those eggs was you. Your grandmother birthed your mother with the eggs already in her, which means your grandmother gave her that DNA sequence. And this pattern gets passed on to you. So now between behavior and environment, epigenetics, DNA sequences, and the egg story, you can clearly see how we can pass on generational trauma. Emotional generational trauma with emotional responses that are passed down. Now, while we inherit these genes from our parents, how these genes are expressed can be influenced by external factors, including your own personal stress, your own personal trauma, emotional conditioning, and things that are often deeply tied to family dynamics. That is why we have this repulsion, many of us, towards one or both of our parents. If you're listening to this and you don't have that, you love your parents, you had a great childhood, there's nothing wrong that had happened, but you find yourself living a life as if you did have this trauma, then ask both your parents about their parents. What did they go through? Did they go through a war? A severe divorce? A death of a loved one or partner? Did they go through physical illness or ailment? Did they lose their parents as a child? In my case, my mother lost her father before she was born. He went off to war, and her mother, at the age of 45, was pregnant with an oops. Her youngest child was 15 years old. My mother's next sibling was 15 years older than her. My mother was born. Her father, on the way back from war to see his newborn child, died on his way back in a freak accident. When my mother's mother remarried, and my mother witnessed her stepfather die at the age of 8 of a heart attack. A year later, she witnessed her mother die of a heart attack. She was alone at 9 years old. Her then 15 years older than her sibling was forced, and I say this because very reluctantly, started to take care of my mother and treated her like a slave. My mother was born in Hungary, Europe, in the middle of a civil war. The Russians were taking over. She lived on a border town of Hungary and Australia. In the middle of a raid, while she was witnessing her people make a human totem pole to take off the Russian flag and put up their Hungarian flag, the soldiers came in, shot them all down. She ran and ran. She was simply going to the movies. She went to the border, and by herself, as she was being somewhat ignored, neglected, and treated poorly by her siblings, somebody took her in. Long story short, she made her way to Canada, was not accepted by an uncle who had sponsored her, and at the age of 16, 17, she was on her own, becoming a nanny, living on from place to place. Then she met my dad. Within 6 months, I decided to pop in. Unannounced, unwanted, unplanned. There I was. Oops. Who knew? The first time you did it, you could get pregnant. She didn't know. She wasn't raised that way. Still barely speaking English. Pregnant. My father married her. I carried this trauma with me that she had been through. My brother even more so. So much so, he was not mentally well. Let's put it that way. Long story short, again, my mother has not spoken to us, my daughter and myself, in 14 years. Because she had abandonment issues, massive abandonment. Her marriage didn't last. And I was her only family. She never kept contact with anybody from Hungary. My mother stopped talking to us over something very, very simple. But she couldn't handle being in a close dynamic relationship anymore. And she has done this to many people that she was close to, and has devastated many people that loved her very much. This is how she reacts to managing her abandonment and her pain. And I'm sure she has another story. My point is, I understood this from the word go. I heard her stories my entire childhood. She wrote a book. I read the book. I read each chapter as she was writing the book. I knew her pain. I understand her pain. I am so thankful that I was not destined to the same type of life. I was privileged. I lived like a princess compared to what she grew up with. I don't see it that way. I definitely see the issues that I had and the pain that I've been through. Bullied as a teenager, bullied as a young child, few disabilities, a lot of other issues I won't mention. Was I uncomfortable with my mother? Yes, at times I was. But for the most part, whenever those uncomfortable moments happened, I understood who I was dealing with. I had empathy, sympathy, and to this day, I still love her. But we can't talk about this. It's a subject that's too painful for her to talk about logically, rationally. But me understanding now her birth chart as well, and even my father's, and my grandfather's, and my grandmother's, I am able to heal. Was this still passed on to my daughter? Absolutely. And she will find fragments of her life to anchor on, to say, see, this is where my abandonment is. This is where you denied me. This is where you hurt me. Because that's what we do. When we have trauma that is not based on exact experiences, but is within our DNA and our epigenetics, we will look for signs that represent that pain. So you may look at your own child and say, oh, you have it so good. You get to go to school, you get to have this, you get to do that, you get to have all of these technologies and gadgets, and you have friends and everything. I didn't have that when I was younger. But yet your child acts as if her pain is just as bad, if not worse, than yours. Why? Why? You can't rationalize it. She'll anchor onto it and say, it's you, Mom. It's my friends at school. It's my dad. It's my brother. Or I am just labeled as this, that, and the other with all the labels we have right now. But it's trapped in her DNA, in her epigenetics. How do we change this? By understanding your parents' astrological chart and how they can interact with yours. Specifically yours, not your sisters, not your brothers, not your husbands, not your dads. You and the relationship you have with your parent individually. You begin to see the patterns, both conscious and unconscious, that shaped your early life. These patterns are not just behaviors, but can also be deeply embedded in your emotional and psychological makeup, contributing to epigenetics effect that influence your adult life. For instance, I'm going to get a bit technical here. If your mother had a strong Pluto influence in her chart, indicating intense emotional experience or even trauma, and Pluto always means it comes from past life as well, this could have impacted how she raised you, creating a legacy of emotional intensity or control that might carry with you. Similarly, a father with a heavy Saturn energy might pass on strictness, rules, regulations, and a sense of limitations, creating a feeling of inadequacy or pressure on you. These inherited emotional patterns are not just psychological, but can also be stored biologically, influencing your gene expression and affecting your emotional health. Take a look at the work of Dr. Bruce Lipton. He proves through his work that this can be turned around. His book, The Biology of Belief. Dr. Bruce Lipton, Ph.D., was a former medical school professor and research scientist. Through his experiments and those of other leading-edge scientists, they examine in great detail the mechanisms by which cells receive and process information. The implication of the research radically changed our understanding of life, showing that genes and DNA do not control our biology. Instead, DNA is controlled by signals from outside the cell, including the energetic message emanating from our positive and negative thoughts. This profoundly is helpful, and their latest research is in the updated 10th anniversary edition of The Biology of Belief. But you can find his work anywhere on YouTube and watch anything that he does on YouTube. And he clearly states that the more that you understand what this epigenetic force is, the more that you will be able to control the cell biology by how you react and interact through your positive and negative thoughts in your outside world. It's how your cells respond to that. So as an example, if you were born with Pluto up against your moon, very close, or opposed your moon, or square your moon, this tells me that you have many past lives with your mother, and that this is a karmic relationship to keep working through, changing this DNA in our body so that we alter it and it no longer exists. And let's say that this has to do with fear, an intense emotional based fear, almost paranoia, sometimes OCD like. And you lived with this growing up with your mom. And I do have a client that I am referring to. We'll call her Katie. So Katie grew up with a mother that was very controlling. Katie's mother was afraid of everything. And instead of understanding her own personal fears and irrationale. She put it on Katie, constantly telling her, you can't do this, you can't do that. You won't succeed here, you won't succeed there. How do you think you're going to finish university? Where are you going to get the money? You're not going to be able to marry somebody that'll make you happy. Because Katie's mother had all of those problems. And so what did this do to Katie? She grew up struggling against this belief system. Now, Katie's sister, we'll call her Mary. Mary's not affected by that at all. In fact, Mary's kind of close to her mom. And Mary is very successful, prominent principal at a high school where they live. And it's a school of arts. And Mary loves the arts. She grew up with it. She's a little brass and outspoken and doesn't put up with crap. That's Mary. But Katie is a people pleaser. She just wants to make her mom happy. She wants she wants peace. She doesn't want to argue. She doesn't want to bicker. And that's her moon in Libra. So they created this dance. And because Katie never wanted to go against her mother, she was afraid of her mother would trigger her own fears. Katie's sister didn't have any fears, the same as Katie did. So there's no trigger. But Katie had that. And so we worked, as I coached her, month after month after month, because she didn't want to do the job that she signed up for. Oh, she was successful. She went to school to be a pharmacist. But she didn't like it at all. She was actually very fascinated with the natural supplement healthcare system. And her biggest block was that I cannot do that. It doesn't make money. I make really good money as a pharmacist. My mom is proud of me. She brags about my daughter, the medical student, and she really wants to keep that connection. So you can see where this is going. The more that she understood who her mother was as a real person with fears and anxieties, and the more that she understood herself as somebody who does everything to avoid confrontation, even people-pleasing, to the point of not setting any personal boundaries, she became to understand her mother more and more as a real human being, as a girl just trying to be a person who lives her life. Now, this was 3 years ago. I still talk to Katie a couple of times a year, and her mom are pretty close now. Yeah, amazing. Now, her mother went through a transformation as well, which I could clearly see astrologically. And I helped Katie walk through that, because it could have destroyed the relationship, the way her mother was dealing with certain situations. But Katie found understanding. I have another client, we're going to call him Bob, and he grew up with massive anger management issues. Massive. I worked with him almost on a weekly basis. He was in the middle of a divorce, and he was furious. And he knew that his behavior was not helping. He even knows during his marriage his behavior wasn't helping. We did timeline therapy. It's an NLP technique where we kind of go back into his life in this lifetime to the original place where the anger came from. He remembered an event with his father when he was 5 years old that he never, ever remembered with accuracy. Ever since that, we healed it. There's a whole process of healing it and going through all of the different stages in your life that happened. It remarkably changed him immediately. Now, he still was dealing with his anger, but he was recognizing it and witnessing it. He was crying sometimes instead of getting mad. He was sad instead of getting angry. He was understanding. In fact, he was understanding so much how he played a part in the separation with his wife that she couldn't accept it. She liked the story of having a jerk for a husband. That just made her life a whole lot easier to separate from it. She didn't like that this guy was turning out to be a good guy. Like, maybe he's trying to manipulate me. What does he want? I don't trust him. It was a great transformation to watch. And his father as well. The story that he remembers when he was 5 was how angry, volatile angry his father got over something very, very simple. Innocent for a 5-year-old. Something that should have been just another day. But it wasn't. It affected the rest of his life. Guess what? Him and his dad have been very close for 3 years. Ever since we did that. Super close with each other. And that has benefited his children. Now they have a grandfather in their life they didn't have before. So if you can profoundly understand the synthesis between the cell biology and the quantum physics and the understanding on an epigenetic level as well as a historical level of your mother and her mother or your father and or his father, you can break generational trauma. Even if you're in your 40s or 50s or 60s, it can still happen. There are many things that need to be done. It doesn't come without a little bit of hard work. I'll tell you that much. I'm still working through the effects of mine and still seeing it within my own child. You can break the cycle. Astrology provides tools for breaking generational cycles. Once you understand the influence your parents have had on you emotionally and psychologically through both their astrological charts and the result of epigenetic patterning, you can take steps to transform these patterns as well. You can do emotional processing. I can work through therapy of life coaching and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, timeline therapy, meditation and mindfulness, and astrological remedies, because there will be patterns or phases in your life where you'll be called upon to deal with it heavily. And that's when we call sometimes the dark night of the soul. Or when we decide to divorce our parents. I'm never talking to her again. And even if you choose not to do that, as I said, 14 years. Some people would say that's not a very happy ending. But I've accepted it. And I'm not angry. And I don't struggle with it. I'm not saying it isn't painful once in a while. But in general, I've helped myself heal by understanding it my whole life, even before astrology. And this is why I can help my clients, because I've lived it. So by using astrology to understand your parents and unlock a powerful tool of self-awareness and healing, the patterns of your parents seen through the lens of your chart can highlight the emotional psychological imprints that contribute to your personal challenges. And when you combine this with the science of epigenetics, this understanding provides a pathway of healing and breaking free from inherent patterns, empowering you to live a life of greater emotional freedom, self-awareness, and inner peace. Now you may ask me, do I need to have a one-on-one session with you, Holly? Can you do this through mini readings? Do I need to have a coaching package with you? Yes, yes, yes. You can do all of it. If you're a quick learn, you have a pretty good understanding of what's going on, and you get a mini one done between you and your mom, let's say, and it just makes everything much more clear. It's like, I already knew all that. It's pretty clear, but this is really reinforcing and supportive. Then that's enough, and just listen to it over and over and over again. I highly recommend a 1-hour one. I can get profound downloads and messages that way. I had one client, still do, and it was him with his mother. And now they go on freaking vacation together. They just went to Hawaii together. I did a reading with her a couple of times and with him many times. Just for him to understand where her European background, where he was born Western, he was born in a Western world. He didn't understand the ways of the European. And once he understood the deep down layer of who his mom was, he was able to reconnect with her at 45 years old. That's how old he was, going on vacation with his mom, going back to her home country with him and her. Coaching can definitely help, depending how deep it is and how painful it is and how much you want to make a change. I hope this has helped and you enjoyed my story. Thank you for listening. Namaste.